Hello, and welcome to this video presentation. My name is Paul Brett. I'm a Senior Software Support Analyst supporting the Transformation Extender product from IBM. The topic for this video is Triggering ITX 10 Launcher from Oracle. Feel free to reach out to me on popular social media channels at Paul Brett IBM. The basic steps to get ITX 10 Launcher to work with Oracle and trigger are as follows. Grant the rights to the ITX Launcher database user ID. Then execute the main part of the Oracle triggering script. Then we will create an Oracle connection in the Database Interface Designer and define the trigger specification. Finally, we will deploy a simple map that should execute every time a table is updated or has rows inserted. We're starting this session on this remote machine, and the first step, as I mentioned before, is for the DB administrator to grant access. Now the access we need is specified in the m4ora.sql file. If we open that file and have a quick look at it, there's a section of the file here that explains which kind of grants that you need. There's a couple of execute privilege statements, create, a drop, another create and another drop. I've summarized all these into a file called grants.sql, where I've put the actual grant that's needed and the name that we're going to grant it to. Now I am actually the database administrator on my own machine here, so I'm going to show you what I need to do. Now that I'm connected, we need to execute these 6 grant statements in the window where I've connected as the administrator. So I'm going to highlight all of those, copy them to my clipboard and paste them into my window. Let's just make that a bit bigger there. You can see that all of the grants have succeeded, granting all those privileges to the user Scott. So we can close that window now, and we're done with that. What we next need to do is reconnect to the database, this time as a regular user. And while we wait for that to start, we'll move the grants SQL out of the way and go back to the m4ora.sql file. And you will note that the install steps paragraph recommends turning set server output on, which we're going to do. So I'm going to highlight that section and copy that to clipboard. Over on the left you'll see that the connection has happened, and I'm going to paste that in now. And then the actual script starts from this section here that says the word declare and goes all the way to the bottom of the file. So I'm going to highlight all of that. I'm going to copy it to my clipboard and I'm going to paste it into this window here. And I'm going to finish off the script with a / and press enter. Now all of that has executed. There are some messages here. You can read through them all if you want, but mostly it says confirmation things like the current user has the required privilege to do this. And at the very end we've got a successful message and there's no warnings or errors in any of the output there. So that's the m4ora.sql file executed. If we were to want to activate column-based triggering, there's a second script to look at, which is m4ora_col.sql. And if we scroll down to the beginning of that, we've got another declare statement, and we want to copy from there to the end of the file again and paste into our Oracle session. And again we get some confirmation messages here that everything has worked perfectly. Okay, that's everything we need to do on the database side of things. Next, let's try to define a map trigger and a map to go with it, and then deploy that map and see if we can get Oracle triggering to work. Back to our list of jobs to do now, and we can confirm that step 1 has been done. So I shall just strike through that, and step 2 we have just completed as well. We did do the optional step 3, so we can mark that. And we're on to step 4, which is designing and deploying a system. I have the Design Studio open, and as you can see I've created a project called Oracle Triggering. There are currently no files in this project. Here is the Windows Explorer view of the same project window. So the first thing to do is to fire up the Database Interface Designer and create an MDQ file. I'm going to create a new database query file, and the first thing I'm going to do is save it into my project. So save, paste in the location, and then give it a name. I'm going to create a new database within the MDQ file, and I'm going to define it as an Oracle connection. I shall call it local Orac. From the adapter list, I'm going to choose Oracle. I'm going to change the access user tables procedures only value from yes to no. My connect string is going to be Orac for both design time and runtime. And for my security, I'm going to use the Scott Tiger user. Okay, now that my definition is in, I can check that this is actually working by double clicking on tables, and we should get a list of tables appear, which we do. So we know this connection is good. So let's close that and let's define our query. I'm going to call this query 1, and we're just for now going to select all rows from a table called test 1. Click OK. Let's generate our tree now to confirm that the table actually exists. So I'm going to call my type tree query underscore test1 to match the table name. Click OK. And it's pulled in the 2 columns from my table, so I know that this table can be found. Next step is to define the trigger for this table. You will note that row-based triggering is currently disabled. Now that's because I made a slight mistake in my query, which I need to change now. Because I turned the value for the query definitions to access user tables only from yes to no, I do need to put the user in front of my table definition here. We can right click and generate the trigger, and you'll note that the row-based triggering option is now available to me. So I'm going to trigger my map every time there's an insert into the scott.test1 table, and every time there is an update of the table. And I'm going to leave the row-based triggering tick on, which means that only the rows inserted or updated will be brought into the map. If I was to untick this option, every row of the table would be brought into the map for every single insert or update. So that's my trigger defined. The type tree has been generated for my query, so I'm pretty much finished in the database interface designer for now. So I'll save that file one more time and close it. Back in my project, if I refresh, you will note that the MDQ file is now in my Extender Navigator. Next step is to create a map source file. So let's do that now. New map source. I'm going to call my map source test.mms and place it in the Oracle triggering project. The map source is open. Within that, I'm going to create one map called test1. And within that map, I'm going to create an input card called in1. Now this card is going to use the query underscore test1.mtt type tree we generated earlier. The object I pick from the list is going to be the dbSelect object, and the source is going to change from file to database. I'm going to turn on adapter tracing, and I'm going to put the append option in there. Final step for this configuration is to pick the MDQ file out and point to my query, which it is pulled in straight away as the only query found. So this card is ready to build and run. So let's see if that actually works now. Save, build, run. Okay, the map has completed successfully. Looking back at our file explorer, you will note that we have a compiled map. Let's sort in date order. We also have a DBL file that has been produced from the latest database transaction. Now there's no output file here because we haven't got an output card, and we're not really doing anything with the data that's coming in from the input card. So I'm going to go back into the settings of the input card and temporarily turn on the backup to create a backup file in the map directory with a unique file name every time this map runs. I'm also going to go into the map settings, change the workspace from file to memory for performance reasons. Map trace is turned off, that's good, but map audit, I'm going to switch that on and have it create an audit every time it runs in the map directory with a unique file name. That's just so that we can see it running every time it runs. So my map is finished, so I'm going to save and build one last time. Next step is to run the Integration Flow Designer to deploy a system to the launcher. I'm going to create a new system definition file. Before I do anything else, I'm going to save this file, and I'm going to save it into my project directory and call it systemfile1.msd. I'm going to change the server from none to local, and then I'm going to click on the add compiled map option and add a compiled map to my canvas. The compiled map I'm going to use is the one that we just compiled, test1.mmc, and then if we just double click on that icon, you can see that it's looking at the database input and writing unique audit logs at the moment, no output. If we edit the launcher settings for this map, inputs in 1, and change the source event from off to on, we then get the pair of sunglasses icon that shows that this is now a watch. Okay, that is my system designed. Now I need to deploy it. Now I may need to deploy this several times, so I'm actually going to create a deploy script. Default. I don't want it to build the maps every single time, and there's no need to transfer them anywhere. They're already in the right place, so I'm going to take the tick out of that. But I do want it to generate and transfer the launch control file, the MSL. So I'm going to leave that ticked, and I'm going to click the details button to say where I want that. Okay, we're going to want that put into the IBM ITX 10.1 systems directory, and system1.msl is an adequate name, so we'll click save and close. So that's the deploy script created. If we now double click, the deploy script has run. We won't bother looking at the results, but we will bring up the Transformation Extender 10.1 directory and go into the systems subdirectory, where you'll note the system1.msl has just appeared with today's date and timestamp. I'm going to check that the logs directory is currently empty, which it is, and the next step is to fire up the services and start the launcher and see if this map triggers every time there's an update or insert to the database. Okay, I'm ready to start my service, so I'm going to hit the start button here on the services to start the launcher service. You will note that logs start appearing into the logs directory. The DBL file has just been written to and will constantly be written to, as I chose the append option. And we should now be able to connect our launcher monitor and see maps running as they run in a live fashion. Okay, you've seen that I've opened up my SQL client on the top left. I'm going to show the current content of the test1 table. There are 3 rows, and now I'm going to insert a new value into that table. Now you'll notice that I have inserted 1 row into the table, but there have been no map executions. And this is because I haven't committed the change in my SQL client. So I'm going to commit that now. In the bottom left, in the launcher monitor window, it's very hard to see, but there is a green dot moving across the screen there to show that a map executed. In my map directory, you will note that 2 files have been created. One is a .log file, which is the audit log for the execution that just happened. You will see that the adapter for input was DB, message is success, and there's an event number there as well. If we have a look at the .back file, you will note that there is 1 row in the output file, which is the row that was just inserted. You will note that none of the other rows have appeared because we turned on the row-based triggering option. Let's do an update next. So let's do an update that affects all of the people except anybody under the age of 20. You will note that it says 3 rows updated, and if I send in my commit, we see a green dot appear here again. Database triggering has happened, and if we look at the latest .back file, you will see that 3 rows have been returned into the map. Megan, Scott and Paul all updated with the values of 99. So there we have it. They are the minimum steps required to get triggering working with the Oracle database. We gave the DB admin task of granting the access. We executed a couple of scripts as the TX user. We designed and we deployed the system. That started with creating an MD queue, which included the trigger specification. We also imported the type tree using the Database Interface Designer. Next, we designed the map with a simple input card. Next, we designed a watch to pick up that map with the input specification to trigger every time there was a database insert or update. And finally, we did the deploy and the run. So that's it. That's all the tasks that are required to get database triggering to work with the Oracle database. I want to thank you for taking the time to watch my video presentation today. If you found the content interesting and informative, please hit that like button. Consider subscribing to my YouTube channel, as I release content such as this on a regular basis. Feel free to reach out to me on popular social media channels at Paul Brett IBM. Thank you.